Welcome to the Waymaker podcast studio. I'm excited to talk to my next guest, Dr. Courtney Hollowell. He's a nationally renowned surgeon and men's health and wellness expert. Dr. Hollowell, welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here.
It's good to have you.
Absolutely, it's good to be heard.
Well, we talked a little bit before we came on about what you do, but why don't you explain it, because you do it so well.
I'm, Chairman of Urology for Cook County Health, which is the third largest public hospital system in the country. We're tasked with really providing care for the under and uninsured segment of the Chicagoland area. It's a big task, and with continuing having immigrants coming into this city as well, we're tasked with keeping them healthy, and we're up to the challenge.
Well, you're the place everyone goes, and people may think about the county system in a number of different ways, but what most people's experience is that we've got some really qualified doctors doing really wonderful things at the county hospital.
Absolutely. I think that there are some hospitals that spend tens of millions of dollars to tell you how great they are, but I think it's not a secret that the community knows that the best doctors in this city reside at Cook County Hospital. And a lot of that has to do with just the sheer volume of what you do, but also the degree of the disease process that you see. Look, when you see stuff that many people have never seen in their entire career, you get good really fast. But also because you have to remember it's also one of the largest trauma centers in the country as well. So you get to see things sometimes that no one gets to see in that environment too. I don't think that's a good thing that there's so much trauma in this city, but it does create an environment that's conducive for getting excellent, particularly as a surgeon, real fast.
And certainly because you see so many things, probably not much that can happen that someone there hasn't seen.
I always say, the minute I'm going to retire is the moment I say, I stop saying I haven't seen that before. The other very interesting thing about Cook County Health that's different than local hospitals is that I spent many years at University of Chicago, for example, is that most of medicine in hospitals is local. You don't have to think very far. The patients come from around here. But Cook County really sees people from all over the world. So you have to think global medicine, right? Tomorrow I can see a patient who just immigrated from Africa or from India or from South America. And so you have to keep an open mind when you're thinking about what's going on with that patient.
I can tell you my experiences there with, for whatever reasons, I have come across some of the most compassionate doctors that I've ever met. And it may be because recognizing the situation that people may be in when they come to Cook County, that they know that people have been through a lot coming in. And I left there really warmed by the care that people got with the experience that I had going over.
Well, you have to remember, anybody going into medicine has a certain idea of taking care of individuals and really trying to be that person to help. But I think that when you're practicing in an environment where you're going to get sometimes a vulnerable segment of our population, that takes a very special provider as well, even more special of a provider. Those individuals have real callings because all the people I hire, they could be anywhere. They typically are choosing to be in an environment where they can make a real difference, a meaningful difference in people's lives. I always say to my employees when I'm hiring them is that I'm looking for someone who's at that level where they can help me take care of patients and level that playing field, right? The best thing I like to hear is when a patient has a better outcome, felt like they were treated better than they were when they were at any other hospital. That means we're doing our job.
And Dr. Hollowell, I want to talk to you specifically about some of the things that may impact men, and particularly black men, as they come through. But first, you've opened this door to talk about those who are compassionate and come in to your view that you hire. Let's talk some about you. How'd you come into being into this field?
Well, I'm a native Detroiter.
Detroit.
Yeah, Motown, and moved to Chicago for medical school, residency, fellowship training. I did all of my training at the University of Chicago and my cancer training at University of Chicago. And growing up, I saw firsthand really how medicine was practiced. My dad is a surgeon. My brother is a surgeon as well, and my sister is an internist. We've got medicine running through our blood. And, people always look at me like, how in the world did you, the truth is that, it really had a lot to do with my mom. My mom was one of those type of individuals that A minus was not on your best day, and you had to achieve. But also, I think it was because I was one of 7 kids, and each of them did so well. There was this internal, a direction for everybody, and everyone knew that they needed to do well, but also that they needed to maximize their potential. So, it was a natural thing to see how my dad in Detroit was basically blazing a trail in being the first African American to train in any surgical specialty at Wayne State University or the Detroit Medical Center. He was the 7th board certified urologist in the country. So I saw him in the midst of, look, it wasn't easy at that time point, right? I saw him grow up in medicine and had the kind of he has the kind of demeanor that people lean into him. He's a kind person, but the type of person that he knows what he's talking about. And at that time point, him growing up in the 30s and 40s, he was double promoted. Now, what is the likelihood of being a young African-American kid in Detroit?
Slim
but he just really was an outstanding student, had his head on his shoulders, and I watched that, and in my mind, I can't think of any more perfect of a role model. I tried to do everything like him. I tried to walk like him, talk like him, be kind like him. And I think that it's worked out very well. And I think if I'm half the individual that he is, I'm absolutely ecstatic.
Well, that's quite a testament to your dad. I hope that he feels that in all that you've shared right there. So you in Detroit, how did they get to Detroit? Were they part of the Great Migration? Were their parents part of it?
They were. And my mom's side of the family came up from Louisiana. They're from the Opelousas, Lafayette, Lake Charles, all that area. And so they made home right there in Detroit. My dad went away to the Army and served and did his. He was in the Korean War and afterwards, this is where they ended up settling vis-a-vis Hawaii. My oldest brother was born in Hawaii, and they went through Kansas and San Francisco, and ultimately settled in Detroit.
It's an incredible family story. My parents are from northern Louisiana, and I have a sister who lives in Liberia.
Oh yeah.
So right there by Lafayette and Opelousas and all. And I went to school at Southern in Baton Rouge.
Oh yeah, okay.
So we're tight with the Louisiana connection. You said you're one of 7 children.
That's right.
And with a mother who was not accepting anything other than excellence.
Oh yeah, and to be honest, even though I am one of 7, we were kind of raised. Our neighbors across the street was dear friends with my father, and they had 6 kids. So it really was, growing up with 13 kids. Wow. And today everybody's at our house, and their mom's doing some cooking and cleaning and getting things straightened out, and then tomorrow we're next door. Wow. So big family, but grew up around a lot of big families. In fact, the first time I ever saw someone cook in a little saucer, I couldn't believe it. I thought, wait a minute, that's what my sister cooks with. I thought everybody cooked in cauldrons.
So, given the family history and them coming through all of the success in your family, this summit is really focusing a lot on where you've been uncomfortable and how do you make it out of that uncomfortability. Share with us a situation where you've been uncomfortable and how you made it through that.
So that's why I can completely relate with this, summit. I think that what's amazing about this summit is that you get people together to talk about not just where I am, but where I've been. And I think that most of us realize that, not unlike even in health, that your career, it's all a journey, right? And I think that as maybe in the audience sometimes, or as a casual onlooker, I might think, well, everything's come easy to each individual. But after you really start to kind of, cone in on people's lives, you realize that you don't get to the top of what you're doing and it coming easy, right? There's a lot of trials, there's a lot of tribulations. I think that, if you look, for example, in medicine, first of all, in medicine, particularly in some of the surgical specialties like I'm in, you don't get to those areas very easy. Those areas are closed off to people that look like you and I, and but I dared to go in those directions, probably because of the example of my father. And growing up in Detroit, I'll tell you, in the 60s and 70s and 80s, Detroit, has its problems, but at the same time had amazing middle class that you could look across the street and say, he's a banker and she's a businesswoman and he's an architect and he's the mayor of the city. And so you could dare to think and dream big. But I think that's an important part of what has to happen in everyone's lives. It's really hard to be something you've never seen. And so you can begin to kind of codify what you want, but you need mentors. You need examples in your presence to be able to actually make it happen. And so the hard part for me, particularly in medicine, was to have those mentors directly in front of you, because it's a hard environment for you. And but I've learned to be self-sufficient in environments. I've learned through my dad, how to work hard. Nobody can outwork you. And so I think that that's how you reap those rewards. You push forward, you get in environments that are uncomfortable, and you grow. The truth is my dad always said, go out on a limb. That's where all the fruit is. So, I've always forced myself to dream big, to always say to myself, look, if not me, who? And so there are a lot of times that even I would say, I shouldn't, I mustn't, but you overcome those fears. In medicine, you start with just general medicine, and this concept of saying, I'm going to put someone's life in my hands by operating on them, that's a big leap, right? It's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to give you these things, and these medications and these treatments are going to get you better over some time. It's a whole nother thing to say, I'm going to put you to sleep. I'm going to go inside you, figure out what's going on, and put this back together in a way that you are going to do much better than you were doing before. And that was that first leap that I made. And then the next leap was cancer, surgery for cancer, mostly for kidney and prostate and bladder cancer. And it's been just a wonderful, wonderful dream of mine.
It is putting a lot of confidence in yourself, and a lot of people putting confidence in you when you're doing surgery. If a friend who says, the only minor surgery is surgery that's happening on somebody else.
There you go.
Something that's happening on you is major.
Absolutely.
Talk about, if you will, being a urologist, and you mentioned some of the cancers that you deal with as well, but what are the issues that you see that are mostly impacting black men, and what is it that we should do?
Look, cancer is one of those areas that I chose to go into because it's constantly growing. You know, you have to be willing as a surgeon, as a cancer doctor, is to be willing to learn something, unlearn something, and learn it again, right? You have to be willing to know that yesterday you were convinced 1 + 1 is 2, and tomorrow 1 + 1 is 17. And that is hard for a lot of people. A lot of people say, I need something to be exactly the same as what it was. But that's actually what's exciting to me. That's what's, got me always leaning into my craft, right? I'm a lifelong student. I'm excellent at what I do, but I'm a lifelong student because as we learn more stuff, things change. And look, urology is no different. I think we've evolved in understanding, cancer, for example, prostate cancer. You were asking about things that really affect people of color. I mean, look, black people have more prostate cancer. They're more likely to have prostate cancer than any other ethnicity in the world. And when they do get prostate cancer, they're at least 2 times more likely to die of it than any other ethnicity. So it's one of these areas that I've spent my entire career leaning in on. I find that if you have a passion about something, maybe because I got a little bit of vested interest in that, you can really ask the hard questions because sometimes those questions aren't being asked by other people. And so, but that's true of any disease process, by the way. If you get to a point where there is a disease process that's being assessed, but it is not involving the community or the population that worst manifested, that's a problem. And that's what was happening in prostate cancer. We were making recommendations for individuals about how they need to be screened for prostate cancer, how they need to be treated, what are the genetic issues that occur in individuals. But if you looked at those studies, they didn't contain the high-risk group like African Americans. So early in my career, we decided that's not going to happen any longer. What we're going to do is we're going to leverage a practice that is a huge practice that takes care of people of color and begin to ask the hard questions. So I have to be not only a surgeon, but a scientist, right? Because these questions are important for you and I to know, for you and I to answer, right? And for our children and for our children's children, right? And the only way to do that is to begin to examine. Now here's the problem, is that there's some inherent problems with that, right? I mean, we don't have to look that far back and remember Tuskegee and all these other issues, right? So why am I going to be involved, Dr. Hollowell, with this, world-class study when I don't trust doctors? So we're caught in this very interesting gray zone that we know it needs to be done, but we haven't developed enough capital in the black community to have the kind of trust that's necessary to be able to do these kind of studies. So that's why the captain of the ship, the chairman of the department, has to be looking just like them, right? It has to be why the captain of the ship knows how to talk to them and cares about them and makes it very clear that this is a very important responsibility that I have, but it's also incredibly important not only to that patient, but to those patients who come after him to answer some of these basic questions, So that's what we sought out to do. And, many grants and many studies later, we're answering some of these major questions that we have about prostate cancer, about how it starts, about how African Americans have a more aggressive disease, why they have a more aggressive disease, what are there things that we can do to improve upon their treatment protocols. And it's been a lifelong mission, and I'm quite certain that tomorrow and the next day I'll learn even more about and get more clarity about that treatment. But prostate cancer is something that's evolved. Now we, before as a surgeon, maybe you were a hammer and everybody looked like a nail. Now we realize there's a whole spectrum of prostate cancer.
Do you know why black people are more prone to get prostate cancer? Has that been determined yet?
We don't know exactly, but we do know that there are populations that have risk for more aggressive disease, and some of that is genetic. And by the way, there are some that have risk for aggressive prostate cancer and more prostate cancer, and they aren't African American ancestry. They can have a family history, and so there's a genetic, kind of thing that's passed along in families as well. That's why, by the way, it's so important that we break this cycle, particularly among men, of not sharing what's going on with yourself, right? Fathers and grandfathers kept close to their chest what was wrong with them, right? They never, you ask a patient, do you have any family history? Would your dad die of the old age? They don't know. Because we didn't talk about these issues back in the day. Men keep things close to their chest, right? By the way, there's no different today among African American men. We many times do not talk about our health issues, or we ignore them.
But that needs to change, just what you're saying, because I do with my children. I let them know what's going on with me. I let them know what's going on with my sisters or my brother, so that they have that history when they go in, because as you're pointing out, the genetics are things that you really can't control.
No.
You can control what you do with that.
But here's the good news. The good news is that we are finding out every day more about genetics. In 1990, the Human Genome Project started, and it took approximately 13 years in order to basically map out the human genome. But what we did find $2.7 billion later and 13 years later was that we understand the genome a little bit better than what we initially started out with. And what we understand is what happens to you, the books aren't cooked. In other words, just because our genetics say something does not make it inevitable that you're going to have that problem. And in fact, a new concept has been really brought out in genetics, and that is what's called epigenetics. And now we understand that, yes, you have genes, but genes are an expression of what's happening in our environment. And so, the bad food that you're eating, the lack of exercise, the smoking that's going on in your life, that environment forces certain levers to go off in your genes. And you'll express issues, negative issues, but there are things that we can do to take back control of our health so that those expressions don't occur as strongly. And so we also know that not only those levers are being switched on and off in ourselves, here's the kicker, they can be passed along to our children and our children's children. So that's why what we do is so important.
Give us some good news. give us some of the good that you've learned in the work that you've done that helps us to know that we're going to be all right.
Look, we talked about today a number of things that we thought were very important pillars in living a happy and healthy life. And I think this thought of empowerment is an important point, because the truth is that if you think all the books are cooked, Mom had this, Dad had a heart attack, I'm just, then what's the point, right? You're not going to be able to affect those things. What we're finding out is you can affect those things. That cancer, that heart disease, that all of these major diseases that are happening on us, to us, are more a reflection of what's happening in our lifestyle and what we're doing. And so today, we spend a lot of time talking about how to take back your health, right? A really good example is how we understand social connections. This is one of those amazing kind of areas in medicine that a lot of people just don't really even know. And that is, there's a long-running, actually the longest study, it's a longitudinal study, a Harvard study, that is still going on today, that has the longest longitudinal assessment of people and their health and their happiness. And a lot of times, what if you had to tell your younger self, what's going to be important for you to be happy and healthy? And what would you say? I mean, if you ask, I don't know, millennials, there's a recent study that says, they said, I need to be, I got to have a lot of money, I got to have a good job for success. I need to have a lot of, I don't know, likes on social media. I don't know. And, but in fact, that question has already been answered. This Harvard study, and now the current director of it, Robert Waldinger, is the fourth director of it. It started back in the 30s. And it's continued to, look and assess at these individuals every 2 years for their entire lifespan. They took individuals from sophomore year in Harvard and people who are young in some of the worst and most challenging neighborhoods in Boston, and they got them in this study, and they basically assessed everything about them longitudinally for their whole life. And it turns out that relationships and how good those relationships are a better predictor of your wellness and your happiness than anything else. In fact, these kids grew up, these young men grew up to be doctors, lawyers, work on assembly lines, architects. One of them grew up to be president of the United States. Anybody know who that is?
Donald Trump.
John F. Kennedy was in this study.
Wow.
Yeah, and so they're still following up. There are individuals who are in their 90s in this project. And so what we've learned is that, yeah, you got to take care of yourself. Yeah, you got to eat right. But in fact, meaningful relationships are incredibly important for our state of mind, but also for our happiness.
That's wonderful to hear and wonderful to know right here in this summit, because right here, meaningful relationships are being built in so many ways, including the one that I just made with you. So grateful for you to be here, and grateful that you stopped into the podcast to really share all these things, and glad that you're here managing our county's health system in the urology department. Thank you, Dr. Courtney.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure.